Hello everybody, welcome to Mr. Morrow's math class. Today we're going to be talking about integer operations. It's very important for you to understand that integer operations are integral to every math you're going to take from Algebra 1 all the way to Calculus. So it's something you're going to see for the rest of your academic career. I think we're going to have a good time today and learn a lot. First thing we got to realize is that when numbers and or variables are being combined via plus or minus signs, positive and negative numbers in other words, they are always being added. There is really no subtraction. Therefore, there are some rules which allow you to use the negative sign correctly. Before we go into those rules, I got to talk to you about absolute value. Absolute value is the distance from zero. Absolute value is always positive and is represented by this symbol here, okay, these two lines. Now, it's always positive because it is a distance. So even if you're talking about the absolute value of -3, the absolute value of -3 equals 3. Why? Because it's the distance from 0. Okay, here's your 0, so you got to go from -1 to -2, from -2 to -1, and from -1 to 0. So the distance there is 3 units, and that is the absolute value. Now, 3 plus 8. We know what 3 plus 8 is. That's going to be 11. All right? Got -6 plus 4 being added here. This is a -6 being added to that 4, okay? The answer here is going to be -2. We're going to talk about why in a second. 8 minus 11. What this really means is 8 plus a -11. The answer to that's going to be -3. We're going to discuss that in a second. If I've got 12 minus 8, this really means 12 plus a -8. Which is going to equal 4. Okay, so whenever you're combining numbers with positive and negative signs, you're really adding them. Okay, again, a +3 plus a +8. -6 plus a 4. 8 plus a -11. 12 plus a -8. You don't have to separate these, but I want to show you the mechanics of why it works, why there's no subtraction. They're really being added always. All right, so let's talk about some rules. The rules for integer operations, addition and subtraction. When the signs are the same, simply add the given values and keep the same sign. When the signs are the same, simply add the given values and keep the same sign. For example, 4 plus 7. It's a +4 plus a +7. So the signs are the same. So that's going to be 11. Done. -8 plus a -5. -8 plus a -5. The signs are the same, so you add, that's be 13, and you keep the same sign, so that's -13. -2 minus 7. Don't get confused here. This is simply saying a -2 plus a -7. The signs are the same, so you simply add and keep the sign, so that's -9. 8 plus 19. +8 plus +19. The signs are the same, so you add and keep the same sign. That'd be +27. -6 minus 12. Don't let that confuse you. That's just -6 plus a -12. When the signs are the same, you have a -6 and a -12. Signs are the same. You add and keep the same sign. -18. Hopefully that makes sense. Please don't get confused with these here. This negative 2 minus 7. Remember, all that's saying is a negative 2 plus a negative 7. The signs are the same. You add and keep the sign. All right, now, when the signs are different, or in other words, opposite, you simply subtract as normal. And remember, subtraction means it's the large value minus the small value. And you keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So again, when the signs are different or opposite, you simply subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. Remember, we talked about absolute value already, and that is the distance from 0. So the largest absolute value is going to be the number that is furthest from 0. For example, 4 minus 6. All right. What this is really saying is 4 plus a negative 6. The sign of the 4 is positive. The sign of the 6 is negative. When the signs are opposite, you subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So you're subtracting as normal. 6 minus 4 is 2, but you have more negatives than positives. Negative 6 is the larger absolute value, so this is negative 2. 6 minus 11. This is saying 6 plus a negative 11. So clearly the signs are different. When the signs are different, you subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. Normally, this would be 11 minus 6 is 5.
Good morning. Mass will be celebrated in the chapel in 5.
Sorry about that interruption there. So back to what we were saying. 6 plus a negative 11. The signs are opposite, so we're going to subtract as normal. Subtracting normally, we'd be looking at 11 minus 6, which is 5. But the largest absolute value becomes to negative 11. So 6 plus a negative 11, or 6 minus 11, is going to be negative 5. 8 minus 5. Well, that's just a normal subtraction problem. But now let's really dive into it and see what it's really asking. It's really asking for 8 plus a negative 5. The signs are opposite, so we're going to subtract as normal and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So 8 plus negative 5 is going to be 3. Because when we subtract as normal, 8 minus 5 is 3, and 8 has the largest absolute value, so we keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So that's why it's positive 3. 11 minus 20. What they're asking for here is 11 plus a negative 20. 11 plus a negative 20. We're going to subtract as normal. 20 minus 11 is 9. But negative 20 has the largest absolute value, so we're looking at negative 9. 16 minus 10. We're looking at 16 plus a negative 10. The signs are opposite, so we're going to subtract as normal. 16 minus 10 is 6. And it's going to stay as a positive 6 because 16 has the largest absolute value. Now, hopefully that's making sense. We have one little tiny special case. When you are subtracting a negative number, the two negatives multiply together and become addition. Let me explain what that means. When you see negative 6 minus a negative 15, I'm not lying to you. This really is not subtraction. This is going to turn into an addition problem. And let me explain why. You have here this negative 6. This guy stays alone. But see how you have this negative times another negative? This negative here really represents a negative 1, an invisible negative 1, times a negative 15. And we're going to learn now in a second the rules of multiplication, but one of them is a negative times a negative is a positive. So these two negatives combine to become positive 15. So now you have negative 6 plus a positive 15. The signs are opposite, so you're going to subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value, giving you 9. 8 minus a negative 3. When you see a negative times a negative, that becomes a positive. So this becomes 8. Negative times negative 3, that becomes a positive 3. 8 plus 3, the signs are the same. Add and keep the sign, 11. 12 minus a negative 9. This is going to become 12. Negative times negative 9 is positive 9. Signs are the same. Add and keep the sign, 21. Negative 7 minus a negative 7. Well, this is going to be negative 7, and a negative times a negative 7 is a positive 7. When the signs are opposite, you subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value, which in this case would be 0. Positive 14 minus a negative 4. Well, this is going to become 14. Negative times negative 4 is positive 4. Signs are the same. You add and keep the sign. That would be 18. And now you know how to add and subtract integers. You can combine any integers using positive and negative signs. All right, now, about rules for integer operations involving multiplication and division. These are really simple. The rules for multiplication and division are the same. So it's really easy to remember. A negative times a negative is a positive. So negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. A negative divided by a negative is positive. So negative 10 divided by negative 5 is positive 2. A negative times a positive is a negative. So negative 3 times positive 2 is negative 6. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. So negative 10 divided by positive 5 is negative 2. And a positive times a positive is a positive. So 4 times 5 is positive 20. And a positive divided by a positive is positive. So 10 divided by 5 equals 2. So this should prepare you, but let's go ahead and practice. All right. Let's see what we got here. Let's practice some adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. First one here, we've got negative 2 plus 3. So that's going to equal 1. Remember, when the signs are different, you subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. 3 minus a negative 8. This turns into 3 plus 8, which equals 11. Negative 8 minus a negative 2. That's going to turn into negative 8 plus 2. It's going to give you a negative 6. Negative 27 minus 24. When the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. So that's going to be negative 51. 38 minus a negative 17. This negative times a negative becomes a positive. So that's 38 plus 17. And we're looking at 55 here. Negative 16 minus a negative 36. We're looking at negative 16 plus 36. The signs are different. You subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. We're talking about 20 here is the answer. Negative 14 plus negative 7, when the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. So that's going to be negative 21. Negative 9 plus 14, when the signs are different, you subtract, keep the sign of the largest absolute value. We're talking about 5. 5 plus a negative 8. When the signs are different, you subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. So we're talking about negative 3. Negative 41 plus negative 40, when the signs are the same, you add and keep the same sign. So we're talking about negative 81. Negative 44 plus a negative 9, when the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. So we're talking about negative 53 is the answer for here. And negative 6 minus 24. When the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. So we're looking at negative 30. All right. Let's check out one more practice. Let's look at multiplication and division, and you should be set. Positive 10 divided by positive 2. Whoa, that's easy. Positive divided by positive is positive. Negative 20 divided by negative 2. Positive. Negative divided by negative is a positive. 65 divided by 5. Positive divided by positive is a positive. That's 13. 75 divided by negative 15. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. So that's negative 5. We've got 102 divided by negative 17. When we're talking about a positive divided by a negative, we're talking a negative answer. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. So 102 divided by negative 17 is going to equal negative 6. Negative 24 divided by 12 is going to be negative 2. Negative 300 divided by negative 20 is going to be positive 15. Negative 66 divided by negative 6 is going to be positive 11. Negative 56 divided by 14 is going to be positive 4, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. And negative 72 divided by negative 4 is going to equal a positive 18. So hopefully now you have a good command of adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing integers. Let's just go through it one last final time. When the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. When the signs are different, you subtract and keep the sign of the largest absolute value. When you have a negative times a negative, it becomes a positive. So if you have 4 minus a negative 2, that becomes 4 plus 2, and then the regular rules apply. 6. A negative times a negative is a positive. A negative times a positive is a negative. A positive times a positive is a positive. For division, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. And a positive divided by a positive is a positive. Thank you very much. Have a great day.